Well, we started 9.5 years ago, and it really seemed like a bit of a challenge. But frankly, we've all hung in, and whereas in the beginning we thought it would take 18 months, it's taken us 5 times as long as that, and we're still here working at it. So something must be right to keep the band of people together.
The Friends of Northwood Cemetery started with John Matthews walking around the cemetery looking for his relatives, which a lot of which are buried here, looking at the state of the 2 chapels and thought, this is not good enough. These need to be restored and put back. The cemetery was badly overgrown and that needed tacking. So he decided to call a meeting of like-minded people and started the Friends of Northwood Cemetery round about 2008.
This project is important to me simply because I have ancestors myself in this graveyard, and coming up to visit it, seeing the state of the graveyard several years ago, it's like, oh, it's such a shame. It's not, it's not very open. I got involved in the project simply because I heard that people were doing things to the graveyard, trying to make it look more accessible and all this sort of stuff. So it was a passionate project for me and a personal project.
I'm a dog walker. I live down the road and I used to bring my dog here, and I used to see these group of people with their high-vis jackets working, and one day someone asked me would I like to join them, and I really like that aspect of the work, like I've just been doing. Just on a Wednesday and a Saturday, there's a nice group of volunteers. We muck in, we help each other out, we work as a team, and we just go and do where we can see bits need clearing, or branches need cutting down, or graves need clearing, so we can read the inscriptions. That's been a really enjoyable bit, and it still is enjoyable to me, that bit.
I've been looking at the plot maps. Previously there were maps to help people find graves in the graveyard, but we wanted to improve it. Each plot is quite large, so you can spend a long time looking for a particular place. So I've been surveying each plot map and recording where headstones exist and what names are stated on them, so it's much easier for people to come along and find a specific grave of their ancestor.
The things I've enjoyed about the project have frankly been the camaraderie and the banter. We're a happy group of people and we get on well together, and in so doing we get work done in the cemetery, and that sort of bound us together. But it's the camaraderie.
I think the most challenging aspect of the project for me as conservation manager is striking the balance between making the place tidy and enabling people to come in and view their ancestors' gravestones by us gently cleaning them off. But there's also been some objection from some people that we shouldn't be doing anything. The place should just be left to grow wild, and and I don't believe that is true.
Me and all the other volunteers have gained a huge amount of camaraderie. We're all great friends, we have such a good laugh, and we've all got exactly the same goal, which is to preserve the heritage of the graveyard. We don't own the heritage, we're just the custodians, so it's very important that we pass on something for future generations that they can look after and appreciate themselves.
The actual clearance and finding things that you didn't know existed. I mean, when we cleared the grave that belonged to my wife's family, and we found graves that were only 2 meters away that we didn't know were there. They were totally overgrown in brambles and so on. So that's the most satisfying thing, I think, is that you discover things that you didn't even know were there.
Working with the council was something I didn't have much experience of, but it's been brilliant. We've had some really good support from the officers in the council. They've been superb, and probably they sort of feel that we're superb too, because we're doing a lot of the work that they would love to be doing from their own resources, but actually they don't have those resources, so we're a sort of free extra for them.
We will carry on, we'll have meetings. We think we're going to have to meet monthly in the initial stages, because once the money's all gone and the project team have moved off this project, then it's down to us to see it through. And our major function will be to try and ensure that there's a long legacy to this work. We don't want it to be forgotten about in a couple of years' time. And it's a huge responsibility. In one sense, This is the easy bit because we've had the funding to do it from the Heritage Lottery, but it's carrying on after this, which I think will be the continuous challenge.
When the project ends, we've got a 10-year plan to implement some of the things that we've put into what is a management and maintenance plan. And that's been worked through, it's been financed, it's going to continue the work that we've really been doing, not for the 9.5 years, but in the last 2 or 3 years we've focused on maintenance work in the cemetery, and that will continue. Projects like this are important for the local community because it just engenders teamwork, team spirit, and a sense of accomplishment. I think if you talk to any of the trustees, any of the volunteers, they all have a sense that they've accomplished something, and that's a pretty good sense to have.
I think projects like this are really important to the local community because they really value their space and their open green environment, and the cemetery has such an important place here in Northwood. I think the community have really embraced this particular project.
They're important for lots of different reasons. I mean, I work for the local authority. It's with the landowners for the cemetery, and I manage bereavement services. And without these critical resources, local authorities in a lot of cases haven't got the money to maintain these facilities, and they are well used. Obviously they're used by bereavement services for the original purpose in which they were designed, but that area particularly gets used by people walking dogs. They might be using it when they waiting for the doctors next door, and it's got a very big throughput and a lot of people walking through, runners, etc. And it's right on the doorstep in a large housing estate, so it's an important part of a sort of countryside estate.
As an architect, the challenge of working with historic buildings is always to understand what you're dealing with, developing the correct details and finding the right skills and workforce to execute the project. And here we've been very lucky to work with GJ Banks and all the skills that are available on the island.
I think restoration projects are important to the historic buildings because they've served a purpose over the years and can therefore be refurbished and repaired for many generations to come, and they give an important community use to the Cowes area.
With all the memorials, we did a survey around the cemetery, and a number of memorials were identified for works we carried out on. And they range from some simple refixing jobs where the headstone had maybe just fallen over to complete refurbishments. There's quite a few memorials that were in, quite a bad state of repair, with trees growing up through them and everything had fallen apart really. One memorial had a tree collapse right across it and was completely covered in brambles. So it's quite an involved job really to strip everything out and put in new foundations and then refix and clean the memorials.
This for us, and I think possibly for certainly around the country, it is quite unusual for the owner of the asset to be the one that's not putting in the bid to the Heritage Lottery. So I think it's an interesting one in terms of how it's been managed, the effort that the Friends Group put into preparing the bid, and the relationships that the lottery have got with the Friends and subsequently the council. So there's quite a lot of lessons to be learned about the process, I think, and how it's managed in the future, because it's quite unique, but it's worked very well actually.
The specific problems at Northwood were quite extraordinary. The buildings were moving as we were specifying and designing the works, and they continued to move, and the ground conditions were very poor, which meant we had some redesign, and it was a very slow and arduous process to underpin them to make sure that they will be safe for the future. And move no more. They will stop sliding down the hill.
It's been a fantastic partnership to work with. The Friends of Northwood Cemetery are fully engaged. They're passionate about the cemetery. They ooze the willingness to develop their green space in the cemetery and all the history around it. So it's been a really successful partnership from our point of view because the energy's there from the Friends.
We get asked repeatedly, have we got any areas that are available for natural burial? So it's something I think that is becoming more popular across the country. People like the idea of natural burial because the people are much more environmentally conscious nowadays than they were years ago. and I think it's important that we can offer it on the island.
The most rewarding aspect for an architect on a project like this is that they're projects for the community. We're developing skills and maintaining those skills for other buildings to be used within the historic environment. And seeing that they'll be used for the long term. We've saved them, they were at risk, and we've saved them, and they're there for use of the community in the future.
I think overall I'm proud of the finish of the chapels. From what were sort of semi-derelict buildings, the finish has come up better than anyone could have imagined, and the quality of the workmanship is superb. And when you're going to stand back and look at the chapels as a finished pair, they're going to look really special.
The works here at the chapels particularly would have never taken place with the local authority. Unfortunately, the resources that the local authority has for building and building maintenance and the significant amount of work that's required here would have resulted in probably the chapels being left uncared for, perhaps derelict and even demolished at some point. So without the Heritage Lottery Fund, we wouldn't have the two fantastic chapels that we have today.
These were two important buildings within the context of Cowes, their history. They're saved for the future, and it's important that we maintain these historic assets. They'll never be recreated again. These quality buildings that we all enjoy and form part of the general environment of the town and setting.
Without these sort of projects, a lot of these memorials where families no longer are on the island or anywhere, the memorials will just end up falling over, trees growing over them and getting covered in brambles, and they'd be forgotten, really. So, it's important to preserve all this architecture and for its historical content. And I think with the involvement, the Friends have done a brilliant job here. They work really hard, and I think everyone's come together, and it's sort of really been good for the cemetery and good for Cowes, really.
We have some excellent new facilities from the project. We have the two chapels that have been refurbished. One will become a chapel, one will be used as a community resource centre. We've got a new toilet block, we've got conservation areas now that have been developed and widened, and we've got our natural burial area, which is new to the cemetery as well.
I think it's important for young people to learn about their local heritage because it gives them a connection with their locality. Here at Northwood Cemetery, there are some of the students that I met at Lane's End, for example. They'd walked past the cemetery a number of times, but they'd never actually ventured in. And so it was really good to help them realise that there were amazing stories contained within the cemetery and that there are pioneers of all sorts of fields of life. And if this project hadn't have happened, they might never have really got inside the cemetery and really learnt those stories.
I think practical work outside of the classroom is incredibly important because students don't often have the opportunity to go out and about and be part of activities which happen in the local environment. Students are confined to classrooms a lot of the time where there isn't as much visual impetus for them to be able to come up with new ideas and new work. So an opportunity like this where we've been able to go out into the local environment and to get to take photographs of the natural environment has been really, really important for the students, and they've benefited greatly from having that opportunity.
The cemetery is practically on our doorstep, and it is a wealth of information for us. We use it for the local history aspect of it, finding out and giving the children pride and an interest in how our community's changed, the geography and the history of our area. And they've really becoming really engrossed in the stories, and they love to tell the stories, and they also often have family members there and they like to share their memories of their family members too. And while we've been going round with our parent volunteers, some of them have come up with very interesting stories as well, which have added to our knowledge of our local area too. It's also, we use it as science because they find out about the different materials that are there and the wildlife and how it changes over the seasons. Because on the national curriculum now, we have to do a longitudinal study, which means studying the same area at different points throughout the year so that you can see the differences and the changes in the wildlife and the environment.
My visit I think, was amazing because we looked around and with my group and taking photos of graves. We saw people that we knew and like people with our surnames, and we were trying to figure out if they were related or not. And I figured out that one of them was, and I was happy but at the same time sad.
I think a site like Northwood Cemetery can offer so much to young people. There's the peace and tranquility that they can enjoy. They can see lots of different species of flowers, wildlife. It's just a wildlife haven here at Northwood Cemetery, as well as learn about all the different people that have lived in the area. There's also the artwork on the headstones and memorials themselves, and I think it can give them a sense of connection as well. Quite a lot of the students that came from schools locally had family members that were buried here at the cemetery, and it's really good to be able to give them a historical context for how the cemetery had developed over time, and up to the present day where they've got their own relatives buried here.
Well, most I liked about the cemetery is all the stories and everything, and planting the flowers and looking at wildlife. And I probably will because some of my family is there as well. Yeah.
I expected it to be not as exciting as it was, because now when we walked around and looked at all the graves, it was quite historical and emotional, some of the graves there, because I personally knew one of the people who were buried there.
I think it's been really good for schools to support community projects like the one at Northwood Cemetery, because it gets us out and about and gets us to make links with new people, new organisations. It helps students understand the benefits of work within the community, putting themselves forward for volunteer work and getting to know how people in the outside world operate and what they do, and how we can make our society a better place.
We got taken down through past all the graves and down to this gazebo, where helpers of Northwood Cemetery were there telling us some history about the place and what they do there. It was really interesting, and we looked at important graves.
They're not always going to be there forever, and the later generations won't know some of the stuff, so it's nice to have like work up to show what was there once, or what is still there at the moment.
Because it's so real to them, that is history for real, and how it really affects them, their town and their communities and their families. So their best writing, some of their best writing over the years has come from actually being there, finding out about it, talking to people and researching. They just come alive, and the way that the picnic that their friends held there was just like reenacting World War II. Suddenly they absolutely understood what it would have been like, and were far more interested and engaged and wanted to write and wanted to become involved.
Well, we visited all the graves that had the people who died in World War II in. Well, and they dropped a bomb on a grave, and then the metal rods from that grave went up into the tree and are still stuck there today.
Projects like this are so important for protecting and preserving local heritage, because without them, there's not the funding there to really look at the heritage of the site, to analyse how it can be preserved. And without a focused project like this, it's difficult to have the time to really research all the background into the natural and built and historical heritage of the site. I certainly wouldn't have been able to offer workshops to so many schools, and as part of the project they were free of charge, but a number of those schools have said that now they've discovered the links with local history and the site, they would like to do the workshops next year as part of their curriculum, and it's really brought awareness of this site to those schools. And I think without the project they may not have ventured over to here.
I think it's quite important because people will see our photographs on display and hopefully they'll think it's good and they will want to go to Northwood Cemetery and see it themselves and learn about that. And hopefully that will bring more people to enjoy that place and heritage places like that.
The resource centre will be a huge benefit to us because when we go, we have to take everything with us, and if something crops up like the butterflies that came up last time, we then have to come back to school. Probably it's the end of the day, we'll have to wait till the next day, whereas we know that there we're going to have resource centres right there that we can go in and find out that we can work in if it rains. We can go in shelter, we can give little talks, we can have groups working there, and I think that will be a huge benefit to us as well.
I liked when we was allowed to go off and explore the whole cemetery because there was quite a lot of things there and it was really quite nice.
So as a result of the project, we've developed workshops which we can offer to schools, educational groups in the future, and we've got some fantastic resources, excellent replica costumes that link to different people buried within the cemetery. And we've also got family trails that link in with the leaflets that the Friends of Northwood Cemetery have produced, so people can come and pick up a trail and work their way around the cemetery, finding out all the amazing things that can be found here.
The projects are important because I think they feed into the knowledge that there is within the community. So it actually helps to bring someone like cemetery alive, because all of the folk that are buried there, they have all helped to build the cows and the Northwood that we know today, and so they create the world in which we live. And so I think getting people from the community involved is absolutely critical to that.
My job involves involvement with death, and it's still a taboo subject, a subject that people don't like talking about, and yet we need to. And so actually getting children and youngsters and sort of from school children upwards, just to make you aware, to talk about death, not to say, and this is it, this is the end, but just to make the subject less taboo, less fearful, and much more of an everyday conversation. And with this centre, the education centre, and with the walks, suddenly you're surrounded in a cemetery and not so terrified, and more importantly not sad, not going there in a hearse, not going there in black, not being mournful, but actually being aware of it and having a presence in it every day as opposed to just on the sad days.
Northwood Cemetery is really part of the history of cows, not just part of landscape history or garden history. It's got so many aspects. It's got the family history, it's got the architectural history, landscape history, and of course the wonderful natural habitats. So it's got everything.
I think it's just an oasis when you go there and see it, the serenity of it, and you've only got to go once and it just hits you as the place that you would like to come back to, and therefore enlarging this to add extra dimensions to it, I think was absolutely key, and it's been done in such a way that I think people that would not necessarily go there will just want to come back again.
I think all the evidence is that if local people volunteer in heritage, it really adds to their appreciation of the community in which they live. So they look at buildings and places and streets afresh. So this spills out from the cemetery. It's not confined to the cemetery. The people that were buried there lived within the community. They may live in the roads that they pass through every day, and suddenly they see those with a fresh light. So I think that's really important. And you can get a fantastic amount out of volunteering. It's not just a sense of self-worth and what you learn.
I would hope that we would see more projects like this. I would hope that the Lottery Fund would look at this project and say, yes, local community can do it. They don't need to have a statutory body standing behind them to make sure it happens, because we all know that after a project is finished, that's when it's most important to keep the momentum going, keep the people involved so that it will continue for the next generation.